going to start. My name's Brad. I'm originally from Canada. I live in Germany now, and I'm going to talk about storytelling. And I guess the best way to start is my story. So, grew up in Canada, always was fascinated in science and biology, started university to be a school teacher, a biology teacher, and then I realized I don't really like teaching kids. I have nothing against kids, it was just a lot of work, and I realized that I was in the job to get the vacation, the summer vacation that's 2 months. Figured that was not a great reason to become a teacher, so I continued with biology, ran into a professor who was doing a course on parasitism and the relationships between organisms, symbiotic, all of this kind of thing, and talked to that guy and was like, hey, that sounds cool, do you have a spot for me in the lab? That led to a PhD studying parasites, a really cool parasite that takes over the mind of its ant host, so we can talk about that at coffee if you want.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and then halfway through my PhD, I realized I don't really like being in the lab. Spending my days pipetting thousands of microliters into these tiny little things, and it was interesting, but I was interested in the results. I was interested in what that meant. I didn't want to be the guy that found the results. I wanted to be the guy that read those and then talked about it at the bar or wherever. That's where I realized my passion was, and it was in volunteering through some career day workshops and stuff that I ran into some great mentors that basically gave me all the content for this presentation and gave me the confidence to do what I do now, which is freelance science communication and journalism. And they basically said, yeah, that's a job. Someone, you can do that. I always thought, these guys that write for the magazines, they're like these really cool journalist guys, and I can't do that, I'm a science guy. And they said, no, you can do it. Someone has to do it, so why not you? So that sent me on that pathway, and like I said, that's where I am now. So my formal training is science. Everything that I've learned about storytelling, journalism, podcasting, all of that is kind of self-taught, but also through meetings like this, workshops like this, and meeting great mentors that have helped me along the way. So kind of like what Sasha said yesterday, just try it. Just get involved, try it. You never know where it takes you, and if you see where you want to go, just get involved, volunteer, start blogging, whatever it is, you'll find your way. So yeah, now like I said, freelance, so I make podcasts for magazines. There's 2 examples up there. I write articles for magazines as well. And this Too Brad For You is just my hobby podcast. So I do it with my friends. It's very informal. The language is off color a lot of times, so be warned if you do, check it out. But we talk about science. I talk about science. Just a way for me to, teach myself, give myself a project so that I can learn new things and be active. So, storytelling, it's something that we often forget about as scientists when we're trying to communicate our work. And the first part about storytelling is you need an audience. You could tell a story to yourself, but it's going to get boring after a while. So, you need an audience. And in order to understand what story you want to tell, you need to know who that audience is. It's going to change what story you're telling. And so really, when you're starting any project, whether it's writing, podcasting, video, something like this, think about your audience. Who are they? What are their motivations? What do they already know about a subject? And what do you want them to know? That's ideally the goal of the stories. You're trying to impart some wisdom, some moral, something like this. And like I said, this is going to define, the tone you use, the language you use, the goal, and ultimately what medium you use. If you're trying to reach your grandparents, you're not going to put it on TikTok. And this is also why the audience is important, because nobody cares about your stupid science. This was told to me by the editor of one of the big science magazines in America, Scientific American. This was his takeaway in the presentation that I saw. Nobody cares about your stupid science. You have to make them care. It's your job to make them interested. And some thoughts just about the generalized, we'll say modern audience. This slide is probably even 4 or 5 years old, so this is probably already changing a bit. But people are smart, especially the people that are out looking for science stories. They're smart people, but they lack specific knowledge about a topic. They have broad general knowledge. They're easily distracted. apparently. I guess, the Instagram, YouTube generation. But they're constantly consuming media. We're all on our phones. Everybody's consuming stuff, so there's great opportunity to reach people. And like I said, it's your job to make them care about your story, about your science. And that's how you do it, is by telling them a great story. And it's because humans are wired for story. We've been telling each other stories. That's been the medium of communication, of imparting wisdom, lessons, knowledge, all of that stuff since the beginning of time, We actually are psychologically wired to respond to stories and storytelling. The shared narratives that our cultures have, that our groups have, it defines our groups, it defines our cultures, and it's a way we transmit information. So when it comes to scientific storytelling or policy making, transmitting information through stories, there's kind of been these two sort of general models. Sasser said I wasn't going to go theoretical, but in fact I am a little bit. And there's this knowledge deficit model and a narrative policy framework. And the knowledge deficit model is, I think, what most scientists tend to fall into. This is how we think of transmitting our information. And it's basically as it sounds. The audience doesn't know what I know, and if I just tell them what I know, then they'll agree with me, right? They just don't have the information that I have, and it's so simple, it's so clear to me that if you just understand what I understand, how could you disagree with me? So you're aiming to supply the audience with knowledge that they don't have. You tend to use a repetition of facts, and that tends to mirror the values of the science itself, right? And it relies on this belief that the audience, like I said, just doesn't understand, or they don't have the information needed to be persuaded and informed. And in fact, there's a bunch of research out there that shows that doesn't work. That is not the way it works, because you're not telling a story, you're not thinking about your audience, you're thinking about yourself and how you view the topic, right? And then you're just trying to beat people over the head with these facts, and it doesn't work. So the narrative policy framework, it wasn't devised, I think, specifically for science, but just policy kind of making in general, and communicating policy to the public, why we need to make this change versus this change. And it acknowledges the fact that people make decisions based on more than facts. Emotions, relationships, their worldview, all of this plays a role in how people make decisions and how they engage with information. So in the narrative policy framework, you're encouraged as communicators to identify as being a storyteller. You are a storyteller. That is your job when you're trying to do science communication. You are a storyteller. And you need to connect with your audience on a human level and on terms that not only will they understand, but that matter to them. So, storytelling, narratives, this is just kind of the basic, nuts and bolts of what is a story. So in science, we generally tell two types of stories. We either talk about research, some kind of phenomenon or some kind of research that was done and now we know this, or you talk about scientists. You talk about the people that are doing the research, that kind of thing. And no matter what story you're telling, you need story elements. And these are the three kind of, basic story elements for, we'll say, if we add the conflict resolution thing. And that's settings, characters, and plot. So when you're thinking of, also feel free to stop me at any time, ask questions at any time. It's okay to interrupt me. So setting. The setting is, of course, the space in which your story takes place. And it's where your characters are going to operate. So if you can think of it as a physical setting, I'm in the lab or I was in the field collecting ants or whatever it is. But other parts of the setting to consider are the ideas that your characters, the idea environment that your characters operate in. So the politics of where your characters are. What is going on in that setting. It's not just the physical pieces, it's all of these other things. What kind of facts might your characters know or not know? That's going to be part of the setting, and it's going to influence the way in which your characters make decisions or why they did what they did, right? These setting elements are either, you can be rigid, they can be flexible. Ideally, your story is probably going to change setting as it goes along. You'll have a couple different settings. But it's important to think about when you're developing your story, what you're going to tell is all of these things, like I said, the physical, the politics, the whatever characteristics of the place in which your characters operate. And then your characters. So these are the people, or importantly, objects in the story that are doing the things, or not doing things that have consequences on the outcome. So, like I said, they can be people, places, or things. You know, a molecule can be a character. Think of the great stories that we have, the movies and stuff that we all know, Lord of the Rings or something like this. That ring is a character, can be a character. It has a major influence on the story, right? And your researchers, they can be you as a scientist can be a character. Oftentimes in science, we're like trained to take ourselves out of the story. You know, we did this, you know, we pipetted this much, we went and sampled these things at this time, blah, blah, blah. We're really like trained to like disconnect from the story because it'll be viewed as bias or something like that. But when you're communicating to a general audience or a public audience, whatever, be a character. Who knows the story better than you if you're the one that did the research, right? Tell people, you know, why you did it. What was your motivation for getting involved in this kind of thing? Don't be afraid to be a character. Your audience can be a character. It's a great way to bring them into the story, especially if you found a way to relate to your audience on a human level. So if you're speaking to an audience about climate change, for example, you know, you could sit there and, you know, let's say this audience is, I don't know, I'm going to be brutal and stereotype rural people or something like this, but let's say it's people live out in the country, they don't have maybe as high education as other people, and they're kind of skeptical on climate change. You know, they don't, yeah, maybe it's real, maybe it's not. You could sit there and say, hey, we have this data and it shows this, and very clearly the planet's warming and all that. Or you could bring them into the story and just ask, well, what have you noticed about the climate in the last, 10 years since you were a kid? This was something that was, I can't remember her name, but she did this, I think she wrote a book about it, did this in America. And she talked to these, construction workers. And they said, well, you know what? I've noticed in the last 10 years, the snow melts earlier, and we can start doing the road work way earlier. And she's like, well, why do you think that is? Might that be climate change? Might that be the planet warming up? So she found a way to connect with the audience and make it about their lives. Make it about something that matters to them. And that was her opening point to get into these things. Same with, guys who, face forest fires. Forest fires are in the news all this time. You talk to the people that have lost a home, they might, have a different idea as what they did before. And your characters provide the emotional punch to your story, right? These are the things that people can relate to. Your audience can relate to characters. And we generally have, in many stories, 3 types of characters. You have villains, you have victims, and you have heroes. And your plot. So the plot is the stuff that happens to the characters. So the plot will determine where your characters are in the settings. Why are they here? What are they attempting to do? What is it about this conflict or whatever it is that they're trying to do that puts them in this setting at this time? Also, dictates who your characters are. It establishes the relationships between characters, and it determines which elements of the setting are necessary. And when you're developing your plot, you want to make sure this is where you can punctuate things with evidence. This is where you can add some of those facts. As the characters are moving through this thing, there will be a certain fact that they are confronted with that drives the plot along, and that is where the sort of you want to add in the numbers, you want to add in the facts, that kind of thing. That's where it can generally you can sneak it in. And then at the end of a story, we usually have a moral. What was the point? What did you learn? In science narratives, this is usually like you get told when you're communicating science. People want to know, why is it important? Why is it interesting? That kind of thing. So at the end of your story, or at some point in your story, you're attempting to get to this, reveal this truth, this point of, what did you learn? A lot of times there's a resolution of the conflict in your story, or there's a call to action. Maybe we haven't resolved the problem, but look, you've seen these characters do these things, struggle in this way to get to this point. Now we have to help them. Now we have to join them. Something like this. So you've probably heard of the hero's journey. It's a pretty standard way of telling stories. I guess it's a pretty ancient way of telling stories. A lot of the mythology stories we know follow this. Again, famous movies like Star Wars, it's the hero's journey. So you have a hero, he's introduced, he or she is introduced, you get to know them a little bit, and then there's a problem. A lot of times they talk about it as like the changing moment, or walking through this door where nothing is the same anymore. So something happens to them where their life is no longer the same, and now they're thrust upon this journey to try and resolve this problem. So they go on the quest. They're required to do a quest. Usually there's one attempt at resolving it, and they fail. And this is, the learning moment or something like this. You receive a gift, whether that's knowledge or a piece of equipment. Luke Skywalker learns the Force, or he gets the lightsaber, or whatever it is. And there's a transformation. The character goes through some kind of transformation, whether it's an emotional thing, or, Rocky when he's running up the stairs. I don't know if anyone knows Rocky. That's maybe an old reference. Okay. The montage, right, where he's training and everything's changing, and he's got to, really bear down and stuff. And then you face the test again, and you ultimately triumph, hopefully triumph. If you want a happy ending.
And 5 times.
Yeah, exactly. Well, then, if you think about this in science, right? How many times have you do an experiment and it fails, right? And then we got to try something else.
Buy another computer and...
Yeah, and then it works. Yeah, exactly, right? Change the reagents. Something was old, yeah. And that's it. So it's a classic way that we relate to stories, and it is a way in which science actually works, right? So if you think about telling your science stories in this way, the easiest way is to think of yourself as the hero, you're doing the research, or your fellow researcher. But there's other ways we can think about this, and I would challenge us all to think about ways where we're not just telling the stories about the researchers doing the research. It's great, we need that, but there's other ways to do it. Like I said, molecules can be stories. Biology is filled with great characters. DNA molecules, immune systems, viruses, parasites, all of these things, they're all characters. And even you could make a parasite, for example, an interesting character. It has the problem of trying to get into a host, and it's a dire problem, because if it doesn't, it's dead. So how does it do that? What the transformation is the evolution of some kind of immune system evasion mechanism or something like this. There's all these great stories. And so that's just like generally, storytelling, not so much focused on the science angle, but when we talk about the narrative policy framework that I mentioned, this is just a quick, step-by-step way to think about planning your story. So you have the hero's journey, great way to plot out a story. And this is then to kind of bring it to more of that narrative policy framework that I talked about. Step 1, again, think about the audience. Audience congruence, they call it in this paper from 2017. So determine your audience. Who are they? What is their ideology? What are they thinking about the topic that you want to talk to them about? What do they already know? What are their belief systems? What are belief systems that will be relevant to the issue at hand that you're trying to discuss? This is where you can use data as well, right? So polling, social science, media coverage, all of these other sources to try and understand what it is that your audience already thinks, and help you to understand how can I connect with them, and how can I provide information that will challenge what they already think in a way that they'll be willing to engage with. And then cast your characters. So based on your audience's beliefs and the issue and everything, what characters might they be sympathetic to? What characters will they react to? So these hypothetical construction workers that I was talking about, they're probably not going to react to, the politician who's saying, we need to change climate change policy because, this, that, and the other, What character might they relate with? Someone in their neighborhood, someone in their family, something like this, or someone who resembles those people. Who might be the most effective heroes, villains, and victims, right? It's kind of weird to think about villains and victims sometimes, but that's what people will react to, right? And we all have empathy. Most of us have empathy. And using that to try and connect with your audience and show them why this is important, you know. This is what journalism is all about. They teach you in journalism stuff. It's all about the story. It's about the human story, and that's why when they cover the forest fires, you know, yes, you get the information on how many hectares burnt and stuff, but there's always a picture of a family that lost a home. There's always a quote from somebody who is impacted by this, right? And then you want to define the problem, and then you can plot the story. So what's the best way to explain the problem, the causes, and the possible solutions using these characters and stuff that you've just come up with? And then you can punctuate this with evidence, again, keeping in mind what the audience is going to react to. And then at the end, we argue the morals. You know, after we've seen this story, we've seen all of this, I've shown you the story, I've shown you the data, I've shown you the characters, this is what we need to do. And again, always, always, always remember the congruence with the audience. Make sure that you're giving them that moral that they can actually act upon, you know. If you're telling people in a poor village that, well, you can no longer farm your cattle because it's destroying the forest. Well, what are they going to eat? You know, like it's not going to work, right? We have to think about things that really matter to the people we're talking about. And then you, again, provide the evidence to support your argument. So I have a quick example that we can run through. So this is an article, Vox magazine, American magazine. This article is quite old, 3 years, 2017, that's what, 5 years now? And it's a pretty standard science article. You know, Minnesota is fighting its largest measles outbreak in nearly 30 years. Blame vaccine deniers. And if we just look at the first couple paragraphs of this, we'll see if we can identify some of those elements I just talked about. So anti-vaccine groups have helped fuel Minnesota's largest outbreak of measles in nearly 30 years. I'm not gonna read it all, but most of the cases are occurring among unvaccinated Somali American children in Minneapolis whose parents have been the target of anti-vaccine propagandists, according to the state health department.
Victims and villains.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'll go through it in a second. One of the most noteworthy fearmongers is Andrew Wakefield. I think we all know who that is. And then here we have, because the measles is one of the most infectious diseases known to man, health officials are bracing for more cases. Here are 7 facts you need to know about the virus. So in pretty standard, you don't think of it as a story because they're saying, well, here's 7 facts that you know, and then they list the facts. But if we think about this, we can go through it. So audience, who is the audience for this piece? General public, sure, yeah. Could also be the people in that community. That's like fit into that. That's a very broad definition of the audience. So we can think about congruence with the audience. So what might be the things that this audience will react to when we're trying to tell this story. But let's jump to the characters. So characters. We have heroes, we have villains, and we have victims in this story. Let's start with the heroes.
Doctors, medical assistants.
Yeah.
Scientists.
Yeah, public health officials would be the ones that really come up. The villain, I think that's pretty obvious. Andrew Wakefield is the head of the villains. There's a whole army of anti-vaccine propagandists in it. And then the victims. Who are the victims? Yeah, the Somali children, the unvaccinated Somali children. So we have Wakefield as the villain, the Somali children are the victims, and our public health officials trying to combat this anti-vaccine propaganda are our heroes. So the problem, the plot, do we have an idea of what the problem is and how it's going to be resolved? Any thoughts?
The problem is the outbreak.
Yeah. I think I have that. Serious outbreak of measles among the Somali immigrant population in Minnesota.
And anti-vaccine policy of
Their influence, yeah. What do we have? Yeah, Wakefield and anti-vaxxers have been spreading the misinformation amongst this group. And I think I have one more. Yeah, and then some people argue that this is the cause of the lower vaccine rates and the outbreak. So we have a problem, we have, if we have who's causing the problem, and then we have this is what we're trying to resolve, or this is our sort of contentious point. Some people are arguing that this is what's causing it, and the moral is that the policy needs to change or education needs to improve to help protect these people. So it's a science story, it's a news story. You don't think of it as a story per se, but this is one way in which that narrative policy framework, you can just kind of see it in action. So what are the qualities of a good story? It should be interesting, should be entertaining above all, otherwise no one's going to want to read it. Relevant, clear, and understandable for the audience that you're trying to communicate to. Usually you want something new and novel, so even though this hero's journey framework has been used for centuries, there's still ways to try and make it new and novel. The characters are new, the problems are new, that kind of thing. Entertaining, as I said. And then I always put in brackets here again, and I got this from my editor friend from Scientific America, John Rennie. True. Does it need to be true? We always think in a science story, science communication, that it's got to be true, but
I think it depends on the story. If you're presenting what you're writing about as something that really happened, like this newspaper article, should be true because people are going to believe it to be true. But if you're presenting it in a way that makes clear, I'm explaining something to you, but I'm using a context that's obviously not true, then it doesn't need to be.
right, your characters don't need to be real characters. You can use fictional characters and plot lines and all this stuff to explain these concepts. Science fiction movies do it all the time, yeah?
Well, it could be more entertaining to present something through science fiction, through fictional characters, as long as like the science is intact, as long as the science is correct and the scientific facts are right in that movie or whatever, and it's crucial to make a good story. And if that science fiction story is good, then it, in my opinion, has the possibility to be even more entertaining and reach even more masses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a funny question. And I mean, we always think about too, like you can think about science too as do we know truth in science? I mean, I think one of the most interesting parts about science and being in science is the parts that we don't know. The stuff that, you get to the limit of knowledge and then what? And telling a great story about that gray area of what and then what? What could it be? What might it be? It might be this, it might be that. You can explain the concepts that led you to that point, that led your characters to the edge of the knowledge, and then make up something about the ending, that's not necessarily true. But ideally, it's probably a mix of both, right? Depending on your story and what you want to do. You obviously can't falsify facts. We don't want to get down that road, right? But it's an interesting thing to think about, and I think sometimes as scientists we think too much that it's got to be true. I have to tell exactly what happened, like we're writing a methods paper or something. Like every single thing that comes into it. And then of course you're going to want to understand like whatever medium you're using. There's certain demands on that medium that you don't really want to overstep, or that it might be better if you stuck with the constraint of that medium. Stories, like if you're writing a magazine article, it can't be 7,000 words. You kind of have to stick to a little bit shorter. That kind of thing. What a story doesn't need, completeness. Doesn't have to, you can leave an open-ended resolution, or question. You don't need to have all of the details of the minutiae of the calculations that were done and stuff. So thoroughness, strict accuracy kind of comes down to the same thing as truth. You want to understand what the audience again, right? So what do they know and what do they need to know in order to follow along with your story and come with you on that journey? So they don't need to know all of the things that you know. They just need to be enough to kind of keep going with the story. Discussions of measurement, uncertainty, confidence levels, all of these things that we're used to having to provide as scientists to prove that we have come to this conclusion in a reasonable way. And well, we're not totally sure, it might be this, it might be that. There's always a degree of error and all this stuff. But maybe it's necessary for your story, but it's not always necessary. I would say in a lot of times it's not. it's okay when you're telling a story about the research to have confidence in the position that you're taking and argue that position with confidence or present that position with confidence. When you're doing storytelling communication, you're not writing a journal paper. You don't have to let everyone know where the fuzziness might lie. You don't have to acknowledge the alternative theories or explanations. This is your story. You have a goal. You have an audience you're trying to reach. Stick to that. Don't get lost in the weeds. Well, but there's this other group that they think it could be this, and so we have to acknowledge that maybe it's there and it's this. No, you have a story, you have a plot, you have your characters, you're on a journey. Stick to it. And then just again, as scientists, acknowledging all of the people that did the work and everything. It's always great. We should try and do it as much as we can. But again, you're not doing a presentation or a journal article for a scientific body. You're telling a story to people. So some things to think about, like I've said a number of times, congruence with your audience. Find the themes, language, symbols that they will recognize. Metaphors are great, as long as, again, it's something that that your audience will understand. Find examples of the characters or the problem, or characters dealing with the problem you're talking about, or interacting with the research that you're talking about, that come from those people's lives. And just in general, we have to always say when we're doing science communication, science storytelling, jargon. It is so easy for us to slip into our jargon. We're talking that way every day. We use it as shorthand. Other people in our field understand these words, but very rarely do people outside understand. And it's really, really important to either get someone outside your field to read your piece or listen to your podcast or whatever it is, because there's so many words that we take for granted as jargon that a lot of people don't even know. So I'm just thinking back of my parasitism, class. You have even words like hosts can be difficult for people outside of that. We understand that a parasite has a host. That's where the parasite lives, within the host. But host also means someone who's hosting guests. If I said host to my mom, she's not going to think of a parasite. She's going to think of, who's coming to dinner? So these kind of things. And we have what's called the curse of knowledge. So the audience can't read your mind. And as experts, we often, again, when we're speaking to other experts, we don't explain some of the really low-level basic things because we're speaking to experts that already know this. But your audience doesn't know these things. And it's difficult to kind of try and get out of that frame of thinking and put yourself into the mind of the audience. And then you got to make sure, the level of detail that you're using. And there's a thing called signposting. So when you're introducing a new concept or a new character or something in your story, let the people know. This is something they talk about in writing, but it's like if you have to use a word that most people don't understand, give a quick little explanation, So the parasite then found its host. The host is the organism that a parasite needs to live. It's really quick, but you don't want to do it too early, and you don't want to do it too late. So when you introduce something new that you think that your audience might not know, give it to them. Tell them, here's something new, here's the explanation, and then move on. So what time are we at? 12, and we can go till 12:30ish, something like this. Yeah. Okay. So maybe we can skip this one because I want us to do a little bit of writing. So at the end, and try and have a little writing exercise where we find a story and we introduce our story to each other. But this is just some questions that I always put up. That's like, well, when you're starting to think about your story and stuff, we had those 4 steps. Let's do this. Let's see if we can answer these questions. Who is your audience? Why do they want to be here? What do they know about the topic? What do you want them to know? Is there common knowledge that your audience might have that you can build off of? And then the purpose. Why am I telling this story? What is the topic? What do I want to say about it? Am I trying to persuade the audience to my viewpoint? Or do I want to make them care about something that they don't know about? How can I do that? Do I want to inform them about an issue or a topic? Or do I just want to excite their curiosity? Do I just want to tell a cool story that people will be entertained by? These are the things to think of. And I would say that then the exercise is, you think about these questions, and can you introduce your story in one paragraph? And once you have one paragraph, can you trim that down to 3 sentences? Can you introduce your story, your characters? Can you give the audience an idea of the characters, the problem, why it's important in 3 sentences? And then can you shorten it to 1 sentence, right? It's kind of difficult, but this is, in journalism, we talk about that, those opening couple lines. You have the headline, then you have those first 2 lines of the story that ideally should give the reader all of that information and make them want to read more. So every paragraph that you're writing should make your reader, or every sentence in your podcast, whatever it is, make them want to keep going, keep them interested, keep them on the hook. So that's kind of the exercise that we'll do, and is I'll get you to write an intro to your science story. So you pick the topic, can be your research, whatever. But before we do that, I want to talk about one last thing about storytelling, and it's something it's an exercise that really helped me when I was thinking about science storytelling. And I'm going to skip through all this. This is just sort of more things about the curse of knowledge and jargon and stuff. So we can talk about these kind of things. Just quickly, for example, here's something. Participants were tested under conditions of good, excellent acoustic isolation. This is a terrible sentence. When all you need to say is, we tested the students in a quiet room. So you get rid of that jargon. You get rid of this, the curse of knowledge. Conditions of good, excellent acoustic isolation. Someone who's in the field will know what that means, but it doesn't do anything for the audience. And by saying we tested the students in a quiet room, the audience knows what a quiet room is, the audience knows who students is. And you're showing them what you did rather than telling them what you did. That's a really important thing too. There's significant positive correlation between measures of food intake and body mass index. Ugh. The more you eat, the fatter you get. There you go. It's done. So that's, I said, tell us who did what, why, and where. Salamander offspring were sampled. We tracked and counted the tiny newborn tadpoles from a shallow mountain pond. Gives you a bit more idea of the setting, a bit more idea of the scene that we're in. Then you can go on to explain how you did it, why you did it, all of these things. So this is the exercise or the thing that I want us to think about when we're going to write these little intros here. And it's making the impersonal personal, right? Again, as scientists, we're always kind of taught that these things should be impersonal, dispassionate review of the evidence. Just tell us what you did to the millimeter. We don't need to know how it made you feel or anything like this. And so scientists, like I said, love to erase themselves from the story. But like I said, we're going to write an intro for a public audience, and I want you to think about connecting yourself or a character to the science that the article will be about. So you're going to write this intro paragraph, but we should get an idea of a character that could be yourself or someone else, and that's our introduction to it. So we need to have a character for this introduction. You want to introduce the topic by talking about that character. So this can be a deep, thoughtful thing that the character is engaged in. It can be humorous, anecdotal. It can be something from your life that happened. It can be kind of activist. It can be like a rallying cause. So this doesn't have to be personal therapy. We don't have to air our grievances, our fears, all of these things. But it has to be personal. It's got to be personal. It's yourself or your character. So I don't want to hear the intro of just, well, our research is important because we're doing this and we're going to find this and it's going to help cure this thing or it's going to lead to this knowledge or something like that. I want to hear a character. I want to hear something personal. And I'll give you just a couple examples that are good examples of making the scientist a character or making something personal. So I have this one, magazine article. That's going to be difficult to read. Okay. I sleep with old sneakers and work gloves under my bed. My house and car are stocked with hand-cranked radios, potable water,
and archaic, shelf-stable foodstuffs like hardtack and jerky. In my closet, there is a crowbar and a very large axe, which I will use should an earthquake tumble the walls to excavate through the rubble to my son in the next room, and also because large axes are very cool. The piece then goes on to talk about earthquakes and the San Andreas Fault and some of the research that's going on there. But in that opening paragraph, we understand, a character, and it's a very personal kind of intro into this story. He might one day have to dig his son out in a life or death situation with this axe. And axes are cool. So that's one example. I'll see if I can quickly try this other one. Flip it around.
Control R.
Yeah, here we go. So, I cradled the sleeping wolf in my arms, keeping her warm against the morning frost, the way I held my daughters when they were small. However, anything but small, wolf number 763 is a sturdy, 80-pound lactating female. Mid-May, denning season in the northern Rockies, the snow only recently melted. She has not yet begun to shed her luxuriant winter coat. I helped state wolf biologist Kent Loudon fasten a radio collar around her neck, fitting it carefully, smoothing her thick black fur so it doesn't become tangled in the leather strap. I smiled, glad at the good fortune of having a young alpha female step into our trap. These are the best wolves to collar, the ones who can tell you most about the pack, the ones most likely to live long, stick around, and not disperse, taking your collar and data along with them. So the journalist is the character in the story, but we also have a wolf. She's invoked images of her daughter, something that an audience can connect with. We have the biologist as the other character in there. We have the setting, the Rocky Mountains, the snow just recently melted, all of these things. This is what we're talking about when we're making the impersonal personal. Impersonal version of that story, we went out and trapped some wolves because we need some data on wolves. Great. This is personal. This gives you something. This is a story. This is an intro to a story. So that's what I want everyone to do, is just take 15 minutes, 20 minutes. We just need 3 or 4 sentences. That's it. Think about your story, what science story you would want to tell. Come up with a character and give us something personal that we can relate to. And then hopefully some of you will want to share those with us and we can have a quick discussion about it. So let's take 15 minutes, write down 3 or 4 sentences right now.